Hey guys, today I will dive deep into the topic of itemization for Ekko. In this guide I won't just be showing you the item builds that you can go for, but also explain when to build certain items and for what reason. This way you'll be able to think for yourself and make the right item building decisions in your games. Overall, Ekko doesn't have the most diverse item building choices, however there are definitely some that you can make. Especially Ekko's last item slot after Rabadons is very flexible and can even be used for fun items like statics or utility items like rapid fire cannon. I will divide the item building into the slots, starting with the first item slot and ending with the sixth, explaining which items can fit into each slot. If you find this video helpful, be sure to leave a like and stay tuned for the next chapter of the ultimate Ekko Jungle Guide. Before getting into the actual items, I will quickly talk about the smites as well, since all of them are useful in certain situations, so you'll have a choice here. For most of the season I've played with blue smite every game, but after playing with green smite and red smite more frequently, I've started appreciating their value. The Smite Choice is not the most impactful choice you can make, and if you like the playstyle of a certain smite, you're not really holding yourself back by building it every game. However, I would say in most games green smite is the safest choice. It has also been Ekko's highest win rate smite choice in basically every patch. Blue smite is best if the enemies have barely any or actually no CC, so you can just run through them. Also in games where you might need the movement speed to catch up to enemies, you can make the choice to go for blue smite. Here is an example game where I made the choice to go for it. The enemies have a lot of movement speed in their kits, and 3 of their champions are ranged and want to kite, so getting the extra movement speed helps me catch up or kite away myself. Red smite has its best uses when you're playing with a low CC team. Then, the slow and extra damage can really help in being able to kill enemies. Here's an example of when this smite choice felt really good. As you can see, my team didn't pick much CC, so having another slow myself really helped staying on the targets. Just as a side note, green smite would have also been a very reasonable choice in this game. As I said, green smite is generally the safest choice and will always provide decent value, since it basically gives you up to 281 extra HP that fully regenerates every 10 seconds out of combat, as well as the tenacity, which can be very impactful against high CC comps. As you can see in this example game, the enemies pick champions that don't want to kite away from me and have quite a lot of bursts, so the shield will help me win more fights. So even though the tenacity doesn't help me much here, the extra sustain can often make the difference. These are just some generic examples, but they should illustrate in what kind of team comps you should choose either smite. If you feel like you don't have the knowledge yet to make the right decisions, you should still try to switch it up and learn from your experience. Simply notice when your smite choice feels bad and adapt for the next time. The Dark Seal should always be bought first. Ekko is the Magi's king, so you should build the Dark Seal in every game and upgrade it in most. The best way in my opinion to get the Dark Seal is to do the Raptor's path and buy it very early. This way you can start stacking it right away and have some extra early power as well. Ekko's second item slot has 2 options. The most common item to fill it is the Hextech Rocket Belt. As I've said in other videos before, I believe this item is a firm part of Ekko's kit and the reason why he doesn't have any other viable mythic choice. It increases his range, allows his combos to be much quicker and provides a small amount of extra safety. Also the mythic passive, which gives magic penetration, is very needed to secure one-shots. The only other sensible option you might have in certain situations is to build Nash's Tooth first. In games where you don't really need the extra range from Rocket Belt, it can help you win fights and secure objectives, while also increasing your clear speed slightly. But just to be clear here, you should not build Nash's first in the vast majority of your games. In a lot of games it will slow you down immensely since you're lacking range, which results in you missing out on a lot of kills. Since building Nash's first is less common, I will give you 2 examples where I recently made this choice and it worked out well. In the first game you can see that their top side consists of very close ranged melee champions. Against these champions that are interested in fistfighting me, the Nashus helps a lot in turning these fights into my favor, especially when I'm ahead. Even their champions on bot lane are not ones that usually kite away but rather engage into you, so the extra range from Rocket Belt is not as needed to be able to reach them, at least in the early game. The second game is not as clear in my opinion, but making the choice to go for Nashor's first here did feel good. Against Aatrox and Lee Sin it helps no doubt, and Draven is another one of those ADCs that usually runs at you instead of away from you, so the Nashor's helps in bursting him down. Champions like Rakan and Ryze are not necessarily ones I can auto-attack a lot, but they are not very high range either, so in some situations I will still be able to get on them. The choice to build Nashus first is always yours, and some people definitely build it more often than me. However, as I said, I believe in most team comps where the enemies have a lot of range on their team, you simply need the dash to reach them. The biggest decider for me personally is often the ADC position. There are 6 ADC champions that I would consider close range, where Nashus doesn't hold you back. They're Karthus, Kalista, Samira, Draven, Lucian and Kai'Sa. You might think, why is Nyla not on this list? The reason for that is because I believe since her W negates your auto attacks, and she deals way too much damage if you stay on top of her, you're usually better off building Lich Bane against her. Okay, so let's quickly go over how you should build these items as well, since you can make mistakes here. Since you're a jungler, the HP from the Hextech alternator is not as valuable, which means you should look to build the raw AP from the Blasting Wand first when building the Rocket Belt. If you can afford a Blasting Wand in the early game, it is usually a good time to go base. If you can afford a Blasting Wand plus Amp Tome, it is a great time to go base. These statements are made assuming that you already have the Dark Seal from the Raptor start path. If you're someone that likes to full clear, you should look to get a Blasting Wand plus Dark Seal on your first base. If you really can't afford it because you're not able to get any kills, you can also settle for Amp Tome plus Dark Seal. When building Nashor's Tooth first, I believe both AP components are very good, just don't buy the recurve bow. So to quickly recap, in most games you should find yourself filling the second item slot with the Hextech Rocket Belt, however there are scenarios where Nashor's Tooth can be the optimal choice. Ekko's third item slot is reserved for either Nashor's Tooth or Lich Bane. Probably the most common question I get asked is which one of these you should build, and the answer is always the same: build what you like playing with. Both items are incredibly good for Ekko and they have been buffed over the course of the last couple of patches, which put them at a very similar power level. So if you're someone that loves the movement speed from Lich Bane, you're not holding yourself back by building it every single game. In my opinion, it can even be beneficial to only build either one of them, since you'll learn the limits of each item. This is not to say, however, that the items always provide the exact same value, just that the impact is not as big as some people make it out to be. If we look through my recent match history, we can see that I build both items very frequently. I have a lot of experience on Ekko, so I usually know when either option will feel better and provide me with slightly more value. So let me tell you how I make the decision. The biggest decider to go for Nashor's Tooth is the ability to auto-attack the enemies a lot. This mostly comes down to the enemy's range, but also their DPS, since some melee champions like Master Yi or Tryndamere will simply out-DPS you if you stay close to them. Another smaller factor I take into account is the DPS that is available from my teammates. If I feel like we don't have a lot of DPS in our team, I'm also more likely to go for Nashor's. Lich Bane is the choice I make in games where the enemies have a lot of range, or I simply don't want to stay close to them and would rather fight in bursts. Since there are always 5 champions on the enemy team, the choice will rarely be 100% favored to either item. To make the right choice, you need to think about who your main targets are and then make the choice depending on that. You might make the wrong choice if you don't have a lot of experience, but the only way to get better is by learning from your mistakes. One very common mistake I see from low elo players is the way they build into Lich Bane. A lot of people build the Sheen first, which is always the worst choice. It provides you with literally no stats and only an empowered auto attack that doesn't scale and deals physical damage. So if you are building Lich Bane, make sure to buy the AP components over Sheen. I personally like building the Aether Wisp first, since it provides some extra movement speed. Very rarely you might also fill the third item slot with the Magi's upgrade, however this should only be the case if you're unreasonably fat and have 10 stacks on the Dark Seal. I wasn't sure in which slot to put the boots, since I often build them as my second item, excluding Dark Seal. However, I think that is generally a small mistake and you should usually prioritize more AP over boots and upgrade them as your third item. So let's talk about the boot options you have. In 99% of your games the choice is between Sorcerer boots and Mercury Treads. The only time you would build plated steel caps is if you play against 4 to 5 AD champions that preferably also rely on their auto attacks a lot. The choice between Mercs and Sorcs usually comes down to the amount of CC in the enemy team. Especially against point-to-click CC, the Mercs will provide great value. Sorcs do feel good when you're allowed to build them, but they're usually not necessary to get one-shots in the late game. That is why you should never be greedy with the boot choice and just build the Mercs if you're unsure. There are some situations where the boot choice is a bit more difficult. When you're solo AP on your team, you have more reason to build Sorcs since the enemies won't build a lot of MR, resulting in flat magic penetration having more value. However, if the enemies picked a lot of CC, you still need to make the choice between safety and offensive value. This choice really comes down to confidence and understanding of the game, so as with everything, the best way to learn here is to actively think which boots will help you the most and then learn from your mistakes. In the third item slot, you can also often look to upgrade your Dark Seal to a Magi's. The most common situations when you should do this are when you have 10 stacks, your flash is up, and you're in a position where the enemies won't kill you easily. Other situations in which you might want to upgrade the Dark Seal even without having 10 stacks are when you need to be the main carry in your team, or you're about to fight an objective that you think you will win. These kinds of Magi Spies can have a game-winning impact, but at the same time are also higher risk. So as with all the decisions, you'll have to learn from your experience. I recommend building the Magi's more often than not, since it will make you a better player and gives you the highest carry potential. And as I said, Ekko is the Magi's king. In this slot, there are only 2 items you should frequently build, and those are Rabadon's Death Cap and Void Staff. The main reason I personally have for building Void Staff is probably not gonna be what you think. But let's talk about Rabadon's first. Rabadon's is the item that you always want to be able to build, since after completing it, you're basically full build as Ekko. Especially after the most recent buffs, you're able to one-shot squishy champs very consistently. Ekko has very high AP scalings on all of his abilities, making this item a no-brainer for him. However, in some games you simply don't have the gold generation to complete it fast enough or even get the needlessly large rods. And that is exactly when I think you should build Void Stuff before Rabadon's. I've only recently started doing this after I saw Jaula Ben do it, and it has felt very good. Void Stuff is 800 gold cheaper than Rabadon's and has a much easier build path. In games where your income is low, you'll get a nice power spike with this item completion that can allow you to snowball. Of course, the main reason to buy the Void Stuff is generally to counter MR stacking champions, but what I didn't realize for a long time is that taking off 40% of people's base MR is a massive power spike for a considerably smaller amount of gold. So this is the most common reason I would go for Void Stuff as my third item. Making this choice definitely requires some game sense, however I think most people have the ability to notice when they feel weak, so that is when you should try building Void Stuff. As I said in the beginning, the 6th item slot has the most flexibility and can be filled with a lot of offensive and defensive items. However, the most common choices here should be Void Stuff, Rabadon's, Nashor's or Lich Bane, depending on which items you didn't build before. In games where you went for Void Stuff before Rabadon's, you should always look to get the Rabadon's as your last item, since it will be a massive power spike that can easily decide the game. In games where Rabadon's was your third item, you can make the choice between raw damage from the Void Stuff or more offensive utility from Nashor's/Lich Bane, depending on which one of these items you haven't built yet. Void Stuff should always be your choice if the enemies are building a lot of MR. One question I get asked quite frequently is if you can build Nashor's and Lich Bane together, and the answer is a resounding yes. They're Ekko's favorite items, so why wouldn't you want to have both of them? Trust me, it feels really good. So in games where the enemies are not building a lot of MR, I usually go for either of these items as my last choice. You can of course also build defensive items such as Zhonya's or Banshees, however I think you should only do that when you're either very ahead, so you don't need much more offensive stats, or when they have incredible value, aka the enemies are either full AD or AP. In some scenarios you can definitely build the stopwatch for a late game teamfight, since the unexpectedness can win you games as well, however that is a pretty niche scenario. As I said, you can also build more fun items like Rapid Fire Cannon or Static Shiv, however they will never be the best choice and are really just for fun. First of all, I want to say that you should only sell Sorks in my opinion, since you usually need the tenacity from the mercs the most in the late game. If you're at a point where you can sell your boots, you can usually switch them out for a Cosmic Drive. The passive of Cosmic Drive doesn't fit Ekko's playstyle well, but the stats it provides are still good. Ekko doesn't have the most diverse item building choices, but there are definitely some that you can make. I hope this video provided you with all the info you need to make the right decisions in your games. If you have any more questions, be sure to comment down below and I will answer them for you. If you found this video helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. You can also see me play and explain my item decisions live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Ekkoliner. If you're interested in getting coached by me, make sure to join my Discord server with the link in the description. Starting in July, I will be giving away a 1-hour coaching session once a month during my livestream. And with that, have a great day my fellow Ekko enjoyers.